Thank you for joining our event today. Women in Asset Servicing are really pleased to bring you Navigating the Route to Parenthood. It's a complex and often a hidden topic, and it's actually something that's very dear to my own heart. My husband and I went through 7 years of fertility treatment, and we got lucky. Our daughter is now 16 years old, doing her GCSEs, and after all these years, I can now reflect on that time with a lot more honesty than I could very early after. I was angry, mostly because I'm a control freak and I had no control at all over that period. What I also learned was that parenthood is a privilege, not a right, and that privilege isn't really given out evenly or fairly. And it was also a subject which was a bit of a taboo at work all those years ago. And I still think that's genuinely true today. So today we're going to listen to 3 amazing human beings. Fiona will kick us off by talking about her own personal journey and how this turns into an experience where she can positively help others. Seamus will remind us that men and women need to be considered, and he will do so by talking as part of a same-sex couple. And believe you me, that story is going to give you goosebumps. And then we're going to talk to Jo, who's bravely coming on to tell us about her journey. And that journey didn't make her a parent as she really wanted it to. But I think as you listen to her, you're going to agree that she's pretty inspirational on how she chooses to use her caring instincts to so many that are in her orbit. Please don't forget to write your questions down on the chat space on 24. Please bear in mind that some of your questions might be difficult to answer without some reflection from the guests. And if you ask questions that are requiring medical assistance, I'm afraid we may not be your panel. But ask them anyway, and if we can figure out how to solve your questions, then we will. Yes, you've heard correctly. We're also going to record the session because we're on 24. Normally, this is a struggle for us, but Caitlin's come up trumps with us. So if you find this event interesting and you want to share it with your friends and colleagues, then it's going to be on the website in a couple of weeks or so. So enough of me. Let me kick over to Fiona and say thank you, Fiona, for joining us.
Hello, and thank you very much, Kate. And I want to say a special thank you to Sarah, Sarah Sandel, who from the first moment I met her, I really, really warmed to her forward-thinking, inclusive questioning and her real interest in this important topic of creating an inclusive family and fertility culture in the workplace. So thank you for having me today. I'd like to start with a short film. I hope it gives a sense of what this presentation and topic is about. Let's hear from some of our contributors.
Want people to better understand what's involved with IVF. It's not just a couple of injections and off you go, you get a baby at the end. It's very grueling in every possible way, and there are no guarantees.
Because let's face it, surrogacy is anything but not emotional. It is one of the most, I would say, most stressful journeys, and in a way traumatic journeys as well, that anybody would have to undertake.
And any history of IVF goes hand in hand with a huge amount of stress and anxiety and fear of loss. He'd asked me directly to confirm that I wouldn't be trying to have a baby anymore. It made me feel like I was doing something I shouldn't be doing, and that I was inconveniencing. I was doing something that's going to inconvenience work. Like I had a secret.
No one else in your community, in your family or your friend circle may be talking openly about that. So it makes you feel like, okay, there's something wrong with me.
Let's actually have a bit of compassion, at the same level of compassion that is shown to, you know, my heterosexual female counterparts.
No one discussed it, you know, there was no workshops or teach-ins from HR. around it. You know, I was a line manager, or am a line manager to others. There's been no training for me on it.
Okay, sobering stories, real stories, and every time I see that video, it still gives me goosebumps, and I must have seen it perhaps 100 times. So who am I? My name's Fiona Skinner. I've been on a long fertility journey. I've experienced firsthand just how grueling the fertility journeys can be. I was a business director in a big advertising agency. I was going through egg freezing, IVF, and about to start surrogacy. And I remember so clearly in all those years how impossible it was managing the medications, managing the emotions, managing the conversations with my bosses. I remember dreading every phone call from the clinic telling me that again a cycle hadn't worked. I remember being in fear of my boss asking me to take a journey to Paris to do a presentation for the company I was working for, Nissan at the time, thinking, what am I going to do with my drugs? How am I going to freeze them? What happens if they're confiscated at customs? All these thoughts and pressures going through my head. I remember being in the toilets in a big global advertising agency, trying to inject hundreds of pounds worth of drugs, sitting there thinking this can't be hygienic and this cannot be the way that things really should be in 2021. Very sadly, nothing's changed since then. But my own personal journey, having started out egg freezing about 10 years ago, very sadly, the clinic I was with destroyed all my eggs. And in my 20s, I was faced with infertility at a very young age. It was something nobody was talking about. My long IVF journey and genetic testing, fresh, frozen IVF, resulted in multiple miscarriages. And eventually both my children were born through surrogacy in the UK and abroad. It was a long, long journey. What I do know from my experience is how fertility journeys change, shape, and challenge you on every level. It affected every aspect of my home life, my work life. It felt brutal and isolating. After having my children, I looked back on my experience and I thought, I have to do something with this. I've had every single experience of every fertility journey. I started speaking to my network. I started speaking to other individuals who are on the same journeys. I thought, I have to make a positive change here. I felt like I had a unique experience and I wanted to use it for good, to help open up the conversation, to help other individuals not go through the same work-life experience that we did. That's why we set up the fertility coaching company, to break the taboos and stigmas around infertility and fertility issues in the workplace. That's why we started the fertility coaching company. In this presentation, we're going to look at some more about the taboos and stigmas around infertility. We'll look at how employers like yourselves can help turn this around by understanding and supporting employees who are on fertility and family building journeys. It's important to say before we go into the topic in more detail that we really believe at the Fertility Coaching Company that every fertility journey and family building journey should be valued, not just those who are trying to have children. So what is infertility? The ASRM, American Society of Reproductive Medicine, calls it a disease defined as the failure to achieve a successful pregnancy after 12 months or more of appropriate timed unprotected intercourse or therapeutic donor insemination. But who is affected by infertility? Let's try and break it down to understand it in more detail. Recently, we've seen a 10-fold increase in IVF, a 523% increase in egg and embryo storage, and 350% increase in surrogacy, according to the HFEA and Brilliant Beginnings. So why is that? Well, we think that since the pandemic, there's almost been a lens shone into our homes. People have more time to think about their work-life balance, and even fertile couples are preserving embryos because they just don't know what the future holds. They just don't know enough about how the cost of living will impact on their lives and their future plans. That's a whole new fertility journey. Things are changing, and very quickly. So this is just a snapshot of how infertility in the workplace, which is what we're going to talk about today, why it really matters. This is shocking. 85% of individuals interviewed by the Fertility Network said that treatment negatively affected their work and their work prospects. Emotionally, 42% of those on fertility journeys felt suicidal, and 90% felt depressed. The first step in driving change around this is to try and understand infertility, to really get a feel for the real issues. Let's look at some of the quotes from some of the real life experiences that you've heard about in our videos. Some of the quotes that I really thought shone a light onto why the situation needs to change. One lady told us, honestly, infertility ruined my life. One older mum told us, my employer had no idea how to support me. They didn't fight to help me, no one did. I had to be my own advocate. One man told us, I lost my career because of it. Juggling appointments in an already stressful profession led me to have severe depression and suicidal thoughts. You heard from John earlier saying that managers need some kind of guide or awareness pack, as infertility affects 1 in 6. 1 in 6 is so hard to talk about. We're talking about 10% of the workforce here. And I know Seamus will be talking a little bit later about the male perspective, but one man told us, I felt the shame of feeling like I'd failed. I was less of a man. I'm not going to share that unless I'm really comfortable and feel my manager gets it or understands. Janine was telling us in the video, I overheard my boss saying if I'd known about her fertility journey before I employed her, I would never have taken her on. So the reasons for keeping silent. I still can't believe that this slide is so relevant in today's climate of inclusion. However, it's true. Stigma, fear, and understanding are the main reasons employees don't share their fertility journeys. And in 2023, it's still apparent that there's very little understanding of fertility, even though 10% of the workforce are going through this. One experience I had was talking to a CEO of a large company about our fertility training. He sent me a note back saying, thank you very much, Fiona. This sounds really interesting, but this year we're not going to support sexual health training within our budgets. I had a moment of thinking, oh, wow, I think I'll send you my training anyway. It really needs to make a difference. So these silent voices of infertility, let's have a look at some of the stereotypes. The image of infertility is still of a heterosexual, affluent white woman in her late 30s. We know the reality is very different. I sat next to many, many women in their early 20s who were going through early fertility issues. Some had PCOS, some had endometriosis. They certainly weren't women in their 40s. Sash Rotley explains this really well when she said the reality of infertility is different. It impacts people regardless of race, ethnicity, geographical location, or the size of their bank balance. It does not discriminate. And we have to include men in our discussion. In our training, there was only one man who was happy to show their face on our video. All the other men said, we'd rather just share an audio. We don't want to be seen sharing our story. We're worried about the negative impact this might have on our careers. But we must include men in this discussion. 40% of fertility issues are male-related, as well as those from LGBTQ+, disabled, and minority ethnic communities who already experience marginalisation. There may be additional barriers to accessing treatment for some minority groups that can be cultural, socio-economic, or geographic. The National Centre for Health Statistics says those with disabilities may also experience barriers. Minority groups are less likely to access fertility treatment. Here's one example. 15% of white women aged 24 to 55 in the US have sought help to get pregnant, versus only 7.6% of Hispanic women and 8% of Black women. We touched on those with disabilities. We heard of a lady called Nia who was registered blind. It took her 2.5 hours to get to the clinic before work. And then she found it incredibly stressful to have to self-administer her drugs with impaired vision in a Costa Coffee toilet. We know mental health can be affected as well, so it's equally important to support those with existing mental health conditions. This perspective is often forgotten, sadly. There's also multiple layers of exclusion within each community as well. It's our job to challenge those stereotypes and stigma. There are some cultures where there's great pressures to conceive. Infertility can be particularly stigmatizing. The expectation is often that conception is easy and natural. Well, it's often not. Representation really matters. We spoke to one Black African lady who said, we were the only Black people in the waiting room. You look at the photos of the babies on the wall, and you don't see any melanin anywhere, not even a speck. It makes an already isolating experience so much worse. One single-sex couple told us just finding a fertility clinic that works with gay and lesbian couples can be so challenging. So let's look at the workplace and the employee impact. It can be incredibly hard managing fertility treatment at work. There are so many challenges. We've listed some here, but I'll just pick out a couple. One 45-year-old executive told us there was so much riding on the IVF attempts. Each IVF cycle cost me $15,000 and it just spirals. You know, with the cost and the time you're managing appointments, the scans, the blood tests. I remember really clearly, every morning at 7 a.m. I'd get a call from the clinic to say, you need to be in Harley Street in 30 minutes. You know, that was incredibly difficult to manage with a really hectic job. The mental, physical, and emotional toll is huge. Relationships with bosses, partners, family, and friends are tested on another level. It feels like you're living a parallel life. Shame and guilt, I've listed them here, but they're emotions that men have told us make them feel less of a man. How can that be in 2023? Something still needs to change. I often really feel sorry for employers. They're expected to manage employees and support them in the right way without any training or guidance or tools. What happens is employers just avoid the topic. Line managers don't have those conversations, but they still really feel for their employees on these journeys. There's a knowledge and empathy gap that we really need to close. It's not they don't want to help, but they just don't have the tools to do so. They're left managing impacts like absenteeism. You know, I had to tell my boss a month before going out of the country, doing a surrogacy journey, that I wouldn't be back for 3 months. I'll never forget the look on their face, but I didn't want to tell them because I still wasn't convinced that I was actually going to have a baby. I'd had far too many losses to be able to believe that it was really going to be a reality. Employers are left managing resources, absenteeism, loss of productivity and retention, when actually having the right support and training in place could have changed all of that. Of course, some employees will never, ever disclose. We know that. But creating a background culture of inclusion can only have a positive effect on how they interact and perform. The legal landscape is one that worries many employers. Currently, employment litigation is only offered for pregnancy, maternity, paternity, and antenatal care. There is no statutory rights for employees on fertility journeys. Statutory rights are the same as if an employee was going off and having a cosmetic treatment. Nikki Aitken, the MP, is working incredibly hard to change that. She is pushing for improved employee rights on fertility journeys, and her private members bill is going through right now. So I can see a future where fertility policies become law, and I can also see employee rights so that employees don't need to take their holiday allowance for invasive treatments like IVF and egg freezing, actually mean that they can't take that time off, and they need to take paid leave to be able to attend those appointments. I'm really looking forward to those changes, and I really hope they happen soon. So the issue, in a nutshell, is that workplace support is critical for managing the conflicts, the demands of work, and the emotional challenges that fertility treatment faces. But the lack of clarity around workplace guidelines can be confusing for both the employees and the employers. And when it's left up to individual managers, there is far more opportunity for workplace discrimination and bias. So it's time to talk. What do we need to do? What can we do as employers? We need to take positive steps to drive a positive change in workplace culture. Be more inclusive around fertility, and create a culture where employees feel safe and supported. And if they do access that support and do open up the conversation, we give them the right level of support and reassure them that that disclosure will not have negative impacts and consequences. But we do know that employees can only offer that support if that disclosure is something that can be trusted by the employee and something that will create a safe space for them to share their stories and access that support. There's many ways we can do this. We have a training program, which is a fertility awareness program. It's e-learning, but there's so much more we can do. We offer that with fertility policy workshops and launch events like today. But whatever an employer decides to do, the most important thing is to bring that education into the workplace, to build that understanding, to build that sensitivity, so that conversations around topics like miscarriage and loss can be handled in the right way and with the right level of sensitivity. We want to open up the conversation to break those taboos, to make the workplace a safe place for any family building journey, and to develop the right policies and benefits so that these kind of inclusive awareness conversations can be supported by the HR and DEI teams to create that fertility culture, which is safe, inclusive, and welcoming. Just some ideas, some initiatives that companies have done, have started to launch, are looking to launch. I'll just touch on those. Some of the companies that we've worked with, NatWest piloted our training, but they're absolutely at the forefront of this in terms of, wanting to be the number one with their fertility support, their access to life coaches, their access to fertility coaches for their staff. You have Bank of America doing wonderful work in terms of medication rooms, making sure that there are relaxation pods, making sure that breastfeeding mums are given safe spaces away from individuals on fertility treatments. That's fantastic. Even companies bringing fridges into the office is wonderful. That is a sensitive, safe space for employees where they don't have to carry their drugs around. They can be stored in a safe place. These are hundreds of pounds worth of drugs. This is a big investment for employees. These are fantastic initiatives that we're seeing starting to move forward. Google's baby bundle, fantastic. You know, employees have a right to thrive in their career whilst achieving family goals. And I think we have a duty of care to support that. You know, providing HR managers, line managers with the right tools, whatever that might be, guides, training, awareness sessions like today. You know, nobody should have to go through infertility on their own. And let's remember that employees are 40% more likely to stay in a job with the right support. And with a younger workforce coming through, I read the other day that actually it's the third most important benefit for the millennials is fertility support. You know, that's the talent of the future that we're trying to attract. Fertility policies, benefits, and initiatives. You know, no one has the perfect fertility policy, but actually the message that gives to the workforce, actually we have fertility guides. We're starting to work on our fertility policy. We're absolutely making sure our fertility policy supports every family building journey, like surrogacy, like embryo adoption, like IVF, like egg freezing. It's so much more than IVF. And the companies that are getting behind that are giving a fantastic message to the workforce of the future. Fertility initiatives like supporting International Women's Day, Men's Health Week, European Fertility Week. Fantastic, get the company behind them. And there's so many support groups out there that can come in, that can talk to you about the amazing work they're doing. You know, get them involved. You know, they often offer free sessions. They can help drive those initiatives through the organization. So the real benefit to everything we're talking about today, not just myself, but for the other speakers, is, you know, creating these inclusive, positive working cultures, understanding infertility, who it affects, who the key challenges are, you know, increased staff motivation, productivity, employees that feel supported on journeys are 60% more productive, and retaining employees, making them feel valued in their roles, you know, giving them that kind of support so they really feel that their work-life balance is being appreciated and valued. And it can only improve relationships between employees and their employers and their teams. So change is needed. We've talked about it today. I think everybody here today will understand that and be behind it. But it will only happen if business leaders are committed to creating these inclusive cultures around infertility and having the right policies and guidance to support this discussion, not just now, but in the future. And I very much look forward to seeing that happen. Thank you very much. It is time to listen.
Thank you, Fiona. That was an incredible introduction into this very, very complex topic. I'm going to turn over directly to Seamus Toner, who will join us from Ireland to talk about his journey with his husband. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Seamus Carney-Martoni, and as Kate correctly pointed out, I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I work for a company called Northern Trust, and I am a project manager within Northern Trust. My husband and I met back in 2007. I grew up in rural Ireland, and I guess the conversation for us was always that we were going to consider having children. We just weren't sure how we would go about it. When we met, I was 19. We were certainly far too young to consider having children at that point. We were enjoying life. So we got married in 2014. We had our civil partnership. For anybody who follows Irish legislation, you'll know that the marriage equality referendum happened in 2015. And then we got civil married in 2016. And that was all very exciting. At that point in our lives, we decided that, right, we are ready now to start considering having a family. When we started considering having a family, we looked at both adoption and surrogacy. We met with several people about both. In Ireland, there are distinct differences between adoption and surrogacy. So, in adoption, both adoptive parents in Ireland are deemed to be the legal parents. You're pre-approved by a state body called TUSLA, and the Adoption Authority of Ireland. It's well legislated in Ireland, and there are now state and company supports in place. For surrogacy, only the biological father is deemed to be the legal parent. There is no pre-approval process required at the moment. However, some clinics do require that both medical and psychological assessments are completed for both the intended parents and the surrogate. There's no legislation in Ireland at the moment, so that leaves the second parent in a very vulnerable position. There is a lack of state and company supports, so at the moment in Ireland, there is no concept of surrogacy leave benefit. So as my husband and I were going through these conversations, all of these ideas around adoption and surrogacy were all continuing to play on our minds. And what we felt most comfortable with in the end was the adoption process. Reason being that in Ireland, we will both be deemed the legal parents. Just before I speak about the pre-approval process for adoption, it's important to mention that I'm involved with two advocacy groups in Ireland. One is Irish Gay Dads, and the second one is Equality for Children. They're both LGBT groups, and our purpose is to make right the legislation gaps in Ireland. So we're working extensively with the Irish government at the moment to bring forward an assisted human reproduction bill, which will account for both domestic and international surrogacy, so that couples, same-sex couples, and opposite-sex couples can have a surrogacy journey without being concerned that the second parent will be left in a very precarious legal situation. So then the adoption approval process. So my husband and I went to an initial information evening with TUSLA in May 2017. Following that, we decided that we would go ahead. We did our paperwork submission, which details your medical, financial, and criminal history. Once that was approved, we did a preparation course, which ran from January to April 2018. Then you await a social worker allocation. We were allocated our social worker in September 2018. And our social worker had meetings with us individually and together, our referees, and they also did a review of our family home. The social worker then completes a home study report and submits that home study report to the Adoption Authority of Ireland. The Adoption Authority of Ireland reviews the home study report and either approves, queries, or denies the adopting couple. Thankfully, we received our declaration of eligibility and suitability to adopt in July 2019 by the Adoption Authority of Ireland. So, onto our story. We received our approval in July 2019. At that point in time, you reach out to an intermediary group called Helping Hands, who are based in Cork in Ireland, and they will work with the adoption agency that you would like to work with in intercountry adoption. So in our case, for a same-sex couple, the only country that we could adopt from was the United States. So we engaged with an adoption agency called Adoption Arc. We submitted a dossier to them, so it was the most incredibly detailed folder that I've ever looked at, and it was basically all of the information about myself, my husband, our approvals, and our declaration from the Adoption Authority of Ireland. What happens then is you are put on a matching list. So we awaited our match. However, in the middle of all of this, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Having started the process in 2017, we were now at 2020, and to say that we were deflated would be putting it lightly. However, July 2020, we received news that we had been matched with a birth mom. She was expecting a baby boy. We were hugely excited. We couldn't wait to share the news with our friends, our family, I told limited people within my job. Reason being that our social worker had always warned us to be very careful about who you tell, because if anything were to go wrong, you have to untell them. So between July and September, when the baby boy was born, we had several Zoom meetings with the birth mom. We got to know her. We got to know her family dynamic. We met her sister, all via Zoom. And little baby Jay was born on September 1st, 2020. My husband and I ran around frantically trying to get a national interest exemption, as travel to the US was banned. So we had to get a visa waiver. We had lots of things to do work related. I had to inform my company that I needed to go on adoptive leave. I started adoptive leave on Friday, the 5th of September, 2020. And our friends had organized a lovely evening for us where they were sending us off essentially to go on our adoptive journey and meet our little baby boy. While we were at that meeting with our friends, we got an email to say that the birth mom was having a potential change of heart. To say the colour drained from both of our faces would be an understatement. We left immediately. We came home. We didn't speak. While we awaited further news, we got up the next day. We were aware of the time difference in the US, so we tried to keep ourselves busy. I decided to just say to my husband, we're leaving our phones at home. We're going for a long walk in the park. And as we were walking in the park, a very unusual event happened in that it started raining. And what I can only describe as a path of white feathers was in front of us. And at that moment in time, I knew that this adoption was not going to work. We got home, looked at our phones, and sure enough, we had received an email to say that the birth mom was going to parent baby Jay. Obviously, it was a devastating scenario for my husband and I. The fallout professionally for me was difficult. I had already started my adoptive leave. I work as a project manager, so I'd handed off all my projects. I was now in a situation where I needed to return to work quickly. And thankfully, my line manager and the management team within my company were very supportive and allowed me the time to prepare myself to have to return to work. Dealing with friends and family was extremely difficult. That social worker was very correct. When you tell people your story, that your good news, it's really, really difficult to have to tell them your devastating news. My husband often, when we talk about it, often describes the feeling of embarrassment. You know, you knew that this baby boy was born. You were excited about meeting him. We'd finished up in work, and suddenly that was all taken away. My mental health, I would always have said, was very stable. I never had suffered any mental health issues, maybe a little bit of bullying in school, just around being a gay man. But I could always kind of explain that away. And what I mean by that is, you know, I always had it in my head that I was eventually going to go to college. I was eventually going to have a change of personal situation so that life would get better. For this one, I couldn't explain it away. I couldn't understand. My head could not understand how this was happening to us. I went to a pretty dark place. Again, we were still in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Lockdowns were happening. And I felt that I really, really needed to do something about this before it got any worse. Thankfully, our company has an employee assistance program, which offers 6 counselling sessions. I sat at my dining table with my phone for a long time. plucking up the courage to make that phone call. I had what they call a crisis intervention meeting with the counsellor as part of the EAP, and it was super. It was just exactly what I needed at that point in time. She talked me through coping mechanisms, how to relax, how to bring my mind through the upset that it was feeling. I followed on then with some additional sessions with a counsellor. This time it was a guy, and he was helpful, but really what he identified was that, I just needed to preoccupy my mind. So I did that. I turned to music. I'm a musician myself, so I wrote some music, and I just plummeted myself into fitness and exercise, and making sure that my day was full of things to do. When it was approaching baby Jay's first birthday, my husband and I decided to go on a family holiday with his family. So we went to Mallorca. The first birthday occurred in the middle of our holiday. That was the 1st of September 2021. What happened that day, I can only describe as a mental breakdown for me. Physically and mentally, I just couldn't cope. It was exhausting. I couldn't push past the upset that I was feeling. We went to the beach. I wrote Jay in the water, in the sand, and a little bit of a sense of relief happened at that point in time. We woke up the next day. I felt a little bit better. I felt that we had reached the biggest milestone, which was the first birthday. And I really got into the mindset of okay, I need to look forward. I'm generally a very positive person. I cannot let this consume me for the rest of my life. We need to move on, with or without a child. That afternoon, I got a phone call. My phone started ringing, and it was the adoption agency in Cork. And I toyed with the idea of answering it for a few seconds, because I was thinking to myself, oh, they're just looking for some renewed paperwork. I really don't want to have that conversation while I'm on holidays. I am so thankful that I picked up the phone, because I picked it up and they said to me, are you sitting down? And I said, yes, I'm actually having a beer by the pool in Mallorca. And they said, right, we have news. A little baby girl has been born. She's in the US. She was, at that stage, she was 3 days old. Birth mom has already signed the surrenders. So you will not have a situation where she changes her mind. Do you want to consider this match? So I'm sitting at the pool with the sun shining down in Mallorca, thinking, absolutely yes. My husband's family are there. We get very excited. We have to plan to move to the US. So when you adopt in the US, you have to move there for 12 weeks in order to fulfill the court process. So we're in Mallorca. We have to plan getting back to Dublin. I have to organise work as quickly as possible to try and get back on adoptive leave and travel to the US as quickly as possible. On the 15th of September, we met our little girl, Maisie Sophia. She has brought so much joy and love into our lives. I cannot describe how fulfilling it is to be her parent. She is just absolutely the most wonderful person. She's fast approaching her second birthday. She is a typical toddler. She keeps me very, very busy. We're starting into the tantrums. So, you know, for anyone who's parented a toddler, I expect thoughts and wishes. But yeah, I guess to round up, a story, something that went very negative and very dark and very painful has turned into such a happy outcome. So I guess for anyone who's considering going through surrogacy or the adoption process, stick with it. Any questions around either, particularly for anyone based in Ireland, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to finish up with a little video that those two groups, Equality for Children and Irish Gay Dads, created to spotlight my family. And thank you for listening.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken. So I hung my head and cried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
Seamus, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'd like to move us again to introduce you to another lady, Jo Rodden. I've known Jo for a really long time. She's a good friend. I didn't realise quite how grueling Jo's experience was until we started talking about it in a lot more depth a couple of weeks ago. So, Jo, let's kick off. Tell us your story and how you managed to arrive at this incredibly difficult decision to stop trying for the child and the impact that it had on your life.
Yeah, sure. And hello, everyone. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I think the goosebumps have just kind of surpassed after that story from Seamus, which was absolutely joyous. I'm sure you'll all agree. Yeah, so my story started just over 15 years ago now. I was happily married to Sean. I got married in my early 30s. And I was planning my life like a project. That's how I worked. Everything had a timeline. Everything was run to a project. So with that in mind, I knew I wanted children, but I didn't have a burning desire. And for me, it was a case of not if, it was just when. So in the kind of Gantt chart of life, I was doing really well. I had a successful career at Fidelity, and I just needed to plot having children onto that Gantt chart, right? I'm sure some of you will recognize this sentiment. I kind of thought, and my husband and I thought it would take about a year, I think, to conceive. And not because that was an informed decision, just because that was how long it had taken everybody else. We didn't really know anyone that had gone through IVF. So we said, okay, we're going to start now. I'll be pregnant by mid-30s. I'll have my second child by mid to late 30s. And I will have all my children by, say, 40, and then we'll get a dog. That is genuinely how I thought. I was naive, and I know I sound like a crazy woman as I say this now, but I feel quite privileged to live in a world where we're so much more open to discussing the challenges of life, and also just, aware of mental and health issues. So we started to try to conceive. That was fun. And after about a year, we started to get a little bit worried. But we weren't too worried. In work terms, I would say we were cautiously optimistic. And we decided, okay, we will take ourselves off to the doctors and to the clinic. We had tests. I was diagnosed with polycystic ovaries, and Sean's results came back unsatisfactory as well. So we were told that if we did want to conceive, the quickest way would be to go straight to IVF. So that's what we did. That was a very difficult moment for my husband, Sean, and I. We both felt terribly guilty. He thought it was his fault. I thought it was my fault. And the truth is it was no one's fault. We were both had issues, but generally no one is to blame. But we started the journey. We were both working full time in incredibly demanding jobs. I echo everything, and I won't repeat it, that Fiona said. We were devastated, juggling too much. It was awful. One of the worst times in my life. We had 3 unsuccessful rounds of IVF. After that, we just took a break. We were just crucified emotionally and physically. We just couldn't do it anymore. We hadn't said to each other that, we needed to do X number of rounds. We just both made a commitment to each other to say when one of us wanted to stop, either one or both of us, we should have that conversation. And we had that conversation. We took a year off. We looked at other ways to become parents. And we did explore the adoption journey. We went to adoption school. We knew these were children in England that were removed under a backdrop of neglect and abuse. So we knew it was a different type of parenting. And a long story short, we got to the point where we were being matched with a child, and it just didn't feel right. And it didn't feel the right thing to do on both our parts. So again, we said, let's put a pause on this. Let's rethink. Let's take some time out. That said, if I'm honest, at the back of my mind, I always had, there's other options. Let's turn to, egg donation was one area that I was quite keen to explore. And I remember to this day sitting down with my husband and saying and introducing this idea as the next step. And he just looked at me and said, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And he said, if you really want to be a mum, then I'll support you, but you'll have to do it on your own. And that was a real line in the sand for me, a real wake-up call. I realized that I wanted my relationship to survive. I wanted, I had chosen Sean before a child, and I didn't particularly want to be a single parent. So that was the end of our journey to parenthood, but the beginning of a journey through grief. I felt awful, devastated, lonely, isolated, depressed. I felt so different. I was in the minority, okay? I was different to everyone else. My story was different, or that's how it felt. I couldn't relate to it. I'd always been popular at school. I was captain of sporting teams. So to feel so different to everyone was really hard. Little did I know that I was grieving at the time.
It's difficult. It's such a lot, isn't there, in there? So the emotional roller coaster that you were going through is just so immense. All of those feelings at lots of different times, and that deep sense of grief and that deep sense of loss. How do you cope, and how would you like organisations to start to understand how people are going through the journeys of the type that you went through?
Yeah, no, I think there's 2 aspects to that. I think there's coping generally and coping at work. So I'll just take them kind of one by one. I think coping generally is to recognise quite early on that this is a grieving process, and you're going to go what those stages of grief are, and you're going to go back and forth between all of them, the anger, the denial, the anger at other people that are getting pregnant. If you can quickly move to understand that, and then show yourself the compassion that you do with anyone that's going through grief. You know, it's not their fault. Nothing has happened here, but be kind and compassionate to yourself. So, you know, you've got to cope generally with that, and then take some element of control, you know, because this is very hard. You're not in control of it. For me personally, that meant doing quite a lot of research. So I looked at groups like Gateway Women, the Dovecote community, support groups online. There's plenty of them. I read books, and eventually, you know, and a bit like Seamus was saying, I did turn to counselling, which was amazing. And I had some counselling, which took me forward and into, you know, into a better place. And I also look for role models as well. There are plenty of them, people in my situation. And then turning to coping at work, this was so difficult. I told no one. I lived it was a secret. I thought about telling my manager, my line manager, but I didn't want him to put him in a really difficult position where he was upset or couldn't handle the conversation. I genuinely felt like he wasn't equipped to deal with this. I did not want to get upset at work. I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to feel pity. And I also felt that this would impact my career. And even to this day, you know, obviously I'm thinking, well, I was thinking of my manager's feelings in a way as well as my own. And I genuinely was. I didn't think it was fair to put him through that. So obviously, and Fiona's talked about this in much more detail than me, support for line managers is absolutely crucial. They need to have the ability and capability to have these really emotional conversations. You know, even if they want to, they may not be equipped. That would have been really helpful. So support line managers, give them the tools they need to have these difficult emotional conversations. And also, I think these are important anyway. I feel like these are life skills to have these types of conversations. If it's not somebody at work, it's going to be somebody that you know outside work. And the happier you are in work, the more productive you're going to be. And then all the other things as well. Again, Fiona's talked about these, but flexible working, policies, procedures, you know, start small and build, but all of it will help. I do feel that we have come some way in organisations, but I don't feel that we've come, you know, far enough. You know, we need to do more. You know, we talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and more recently it's been, you know, awareness of, say, menopause, or before that mental health, you know, LGBTQ plus, all of these things. But this is not on the agenda, and it should be, as should, you know, support for women who don't have children, such as myself. You know, if we really want to have a diversified workforce, we need to have emotional conversations with them. And we also need to respect and make them feel included at work, I think. I think the main thing for me is I didn't feel like I had a choice. I really didn't. I didn't feel I could tell anyone. I would have liked to have had that choice, whether I've taken it or not. And I think finally, you know, had I had support in the workplace, perhaps maybe, who knows, I would have tried harder and for longer.
As you say, who knows, but I can only echo everything that you've just been saying about the importance of enabling people's emotional intelligence around what is an incredibly difficult topic. I want to finish up with you though about where you are today, because I know that you're in a really happy place now, and I want you to be able to express why you're in a happy place and what you do about all of those instincts to love and support people in your personal life and in work. I think it's inspirational.
Oh, thank you. Well, relationships are really important to me. And I think obviously the relationship with yourself is important. So as I said, be kind to yourself, be considerate with yourself throughout this journey. I have friends from all walks of life. Some have children, some don't have children. I feel like I'm in this unique, privileged position, actually, where I can actually form really deep, meaningful relationships with people. I have the time, I have the desire, I have the motivation, and I have a lot of empathy with individuals who are different in some way, because that was how I felt. So I'm able to connect with people from all walks of life, and I have a lot of meaningful relationships. I also I think it's also really important, if you have a maternal instinct, you do not have to be a mother to, to feed those maternal instincts. You can nurture in lots and lots of different ways. It doesn't really matter what it is. It can be an elderly family member. It can be a neighbor. It can be, other children in your life. It can be a passion, a joy, a hobby. But channel that somewhere. I had a friend that fostered 5 kittens, and that was so important for her to nurture that. So yes, I feel very lucky in terms of kind of there are lots of positives. You start to feel like it's a little bit of a gift, if I'm quite honest. We know that children take a lot of time and energy, and I think one of the things I did was I didn't wait for a light bulb moment. What I did is I slowly introduced wonderful and different things in my life. So I learned to sail, I traveled, I did some, volunteering, and I slowly built to what was already, I thought a pretty fulfilled life. I think that also it's really important to think of the positives. You can always think of the positives. So from my perspective, and there's always a different lens that you can look through, I think it's really important to see what those positives are. So I would say, not having children has enabled me to really focus on what makes me happy, what fulfills me. I kind of feel like my husband and I are a little bit ahead of the game. We have resilience, we're focused on each other, we're focusing on what fulfills us without having that understandable occupation with children and the time that they take. Also at work, relationships at work, I heavily invest in and I enjoy. I have the ability to support colleagues at work. I'm part of the colleague forum at Hargreaves Lansdown, where I represent colleagues' views. I have the time and energy to do that. So from my perspective, there is joy without children. And I don't think that it has to define and isolate you. In fact, the opposite. For me, it's helped me to connect to people.
It's difficult to know what to say at the end of that because it's so powerful. Thank you so much for coming on. I think
welcome.
You and Seamus are truly inspirational and extremely brave for coming on and explaining your stories very openly and honestly and without self-pity, which is absolutely amazing. I'd also like to say thank you to Fiona. Understanding fertility and understanding the various routes to parenthood are really important, and they impact people in so many different ways in the workplace. We do have questions. We've run out of time. The stories were so powerful that what we'll do is we will talk to the speakers after this event and ask them if they would like to answer some of the questions and put them with recording, which is going on to the website. So I'd like to thank Fiona, Seamus, Joe. I'd also like to thank Sarah and Caitlin, who brought this story to life for us. Thank you for joining. Please always continue to support us, and please also go onto the website or go through one of us to say thank you if you'd like to do so to the 3 brilliant speakers we had today. I hope to see some of you at the summer drinks at Schroders on the 12th of June. Everybody is welcome, and Sarah will email out as soon as the recording is available. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.